Welcome back to the War Academy, where the more you know, the less you die. Before we begin, guys, the most important thing that you need to know right now, it's been proven statistically, like hitting the subscribe button on my channel just makes you win your next game.
Fact.
If you guys haven't noticed, there's very little info on all of the internet about tips and tricks to deploy terrain. How do you do player-based terrain? There's like no beginning spot. It's either people don't know what to do or people know exactly what to do. So leave me comments on what it is you guys do. I want to know, like, if you use this piece of terrain and this is the way to do it for your army, let me know that specific example. This is the stuff that's gonna get people better.
This is like a helpful video.
There are 3 types of player-placed terrain that you're gonna see at events. The whole table placement is where you can take your piece and place it anywhere you want to on the table, but you want to make sure that you're okay with either side because you don't know which side you're going to get. There's the most common version, which is half table. So half table, usually you have to be either 4 or 6 inches away from another piece of terrain, but you deploy on your half of the table, your opponent deploys on their half of the table. You cannot have any piece of terrain pass over that center line. Then there's the new hotness, which is where there is 1 or 2 pieces preset up on the board already, usually in the center, and then you build around that on your side and your opponent builds on his side. All right, so now we go on to the juicy bits, which you're all probably here for. This is tricks to deploying the actual terrain itself. If you got first drop, you're gonna want to take the center with the largest piece that you have. If for some reason your opponent's an idiot and he doesn't do that and he went first, then as going second, you're going to take advantage of that. That's also going to tell you probably have an easy game on your hands. So next, you're going to have to figure out, is your army going to be able to outshoot them? So the best way to think of that is just if both your armies were to stand still, like objectives didn't matter. If you just were to stand still, who would win that game? Who outshoots who? And depending on what that answer is, you're either going to want to create fire lanes or close them by using some of your smaller ruins to create open lines. So a big mistake that I see constantly with Tau players is Tau players go, oh, well, I'm going to put all my terrain off to the side, create this big, huge open area that you have to run through. That's not exactly a good idea because it's not enough of the board that's actually open. What you're better off doing is creating fire lanes for your really shooty units and then making the opponent have to go through those in order to get to you, and that's how you're just going to wipe him up with your firepower. Same with if you're a melee unit, if you're a melee army and you see your opponent is trying to set those fire lanes, you got to use your terrain to close them, which means you're going to be putting terrain really far forward and in the center to close those fire lines, so you'll be able to go at diagonal movements to get from terrain piece to terrain piece, so you don't get hit by something like a storm surge or a crusader knight. And always remember your movement. You're going to be moving from obscure terrain to obscure terrain until you're ready to engage. So melee is usually going to go start behind obscure, then it's going to move through the wall because it's infantry. It's going to move right behind another piece of obscuring terrain. Then it's going to move out from there and usually into cover where it's going to hold the objective, or you're going to set it up a little bit at an angle. So you're going to move out to another obscure so you can charge from behind that to even avoid overwatch. If you can't avoid overwatch, you're going to make sure that you're at least in cover. And then obviously keep the cover on your side of the mid objectives. If you have mid objectives at all, make sure that you have as much cover as you can without going over the center, because you can't place terrain directly on the center of the objective. So by pushing up as far as you can without touching that center piece, you'll be able to a lot of times push your opponent's cover off. So if he wants to sit on the objective, he's going to do so either on your side of the table or not in cover. Next, you're going to be looking for places where the enemy ranged units have to come into a melee threat bubble that you've created in order to get ideal shots. So this is similar to the setting up the closing and setting up the fire lanes. So if you see ranged units, you're against a heavy ranged unit, you know, where your melee units are planning to go, the best angles that he can get to fire on those, make sure that that comes into your melee threat zones. And this is why you hear people talk about 40K being the trading game. You're trying to force trades all the time, meaning if he wants to shoot his retributors, he's got to come out to this area to get the best shot. And if he comes into that area, yeah, he's going to get to shoot. He's going to fuck something up real bad, but he's going to lose that to your charging Vanguard veterans. And that's why when it comes to terrain deployment, the proactive mindset is definitely better than the reactive mindset. So for the pieces that you're going to see, my favorite piece personally is the Big L, also known as the Nova L. The reason why I like the big L the best is that there's 3 different ways you can deploy it depending on which type of army you're playing. So first is the most common way, which is always flip the terrain backwards, guys. Like, don't have the cover part facing your deployment zone. Flip it around. Usually you're going to want the flat edge of the L facing towards your deployment and the cover side pointing towards your enemy. So there's a bunch of reasons why you're not quite as easy to hide because you don't have that little corner to hide behind. But now if you have a dreadnought, say, behind that piece of terrain, your opponent doesn't know, is that dreadnought going to go left or right? Where if you have the L pointing towards you, then your opponent knows, well, that thing's going to go left for sure because it's the only way it can go. So unless you're running like pure infantry, you're always going to want to flip it backwards. And this way too, when you expose yourself, when you come out of cover, and you will come out of your obscuring cover into regular cover, versus if you had it the other way around, you'd be coming out of your obscure into openness. And if you're playing an army like Space Marines, this is gonna get you killed. So sometimes it is good to put the L facing towards you, and that's when you have a lot of stuff you need to protect. If you just don't have the terrain to protect yourself, you can use that little L to block off a lot of the shots that might be coming in at you. This does hurt a lot of vehicles and monsters. It can sometimes hurt infantry because they won't be able to come out into cover as easily unless you set up another piece of cover for them to go directly into. It does help if you are going second. You'll get a little bit less shots on you usually. And then there's the corner towards the enemy. So corner towards the enemy, just putting at a point. This is the best if you took big units. If you have a unit of 20 or 30 guys, this is the best way to hide them. Not only because the infantry move through there, but you'll be able to leave some back that are going to still be in cover. Because it's such a big unit, they won't all get through the building. So now you still have your cover save, but because you have L's, the corners going on each side, you are incredibly protected against melee. When I tell people to move their units, the best formation that you can move your unit in is the triangle formation. Having that one guy up as far as he can go, and the rest of your unit much, much farther back. This is going to give you a further reach and give a smaller reach back into your infantry. Next up, we have the box terrain, the area terrain. This is your typical buildings that are just square circles, something that a enemy vehicle is going to have a really hard time getting into. So this is the best thing for infantry. So if you have Terminators and they don't really have any guns on, they just got a lot of melee weapons, or you have any other type of like heavy melee infantry unit, these love to get inside these boxes where they can sit in cover in case they're shot at. So they'll still have like a very good save, but now they're very resistant to being charged. So especially if you put yourself right up against the edge. Games Workshop made that rule that we all hated where infantry or things could attack through the wall differently. They got rid of that, so you technically can go back to breaking that rule. And that was the problem with that whole freaking thing, is that most people were unaware of how to break that part of the game. Then Games Workshop fixed it, so everybody was aware of how you could break the game, and now they undid it, so now it's just worse than it's ever been. It's how everybody and their grandma knows about it.
Oh, that's greasy. That's really fucking greasy. Yeah, it's greasy. Greasy.
So like I mentioned, these are great to block vehicles. You can use these as a big footprint of just nothing unless it's infantry can walk through here. This is probably the most ideal place to use for your melee threat zones. So if you got good armor, you can be inside of it. If you got not great armor, you can be just outside of it and behind it, of course. So the next piece that you're probably always going to have at a player place terrain event is the forests or craters. So this is the Lord of War favorite. The Lord of Wars can't interact much with terrain because they're just too big, but craters they can interact with because that's your opponent that actually interacts with that. So if you have Lord of Wars in your army, go to look from the map and say, this is probably the best place that I can hide, or I'm going to sit and fight. So for example, you're going to put that crater or forest mostly on an objective, and that way your knight or big Lord of War is going to sit slightly back on the objective behind the crater, not touching it, and on that objective. So that way if anybody tries to charge you, you just have a permanent -2 charge. So since you're too big, you're not going to get the -1 to hit from dense, you're not going to get obscure. There's really nothing you can use, and terrain is your worst enemy when you're playing Lord of Wars. Like you want a battlefield with no terrain on it, and ideal usually if you're playing knights or, you know, even things big, anything bigger than a bloodthirster basically. So if you have that crater, you can use that crater as a super anti-melee threat. So me as someone that plays a lot of Tau, I use that -2 strategy or -2 charge stratagem every single time I'm charged. And you can just have it for free using forests and craters. And that's why it's a great counter against certain armies, like say Blood Angels, that are the always be charging list. Best ways to counter them are going to be the craters and forests and your interrupt stratagem. And you can really get the edge of someone and really catch them off guard by using these with the big brain. Also, if you see enemy range coming at you that has really high AP, so plasma gun squad, not even plasma gun squads anymore, but things that have AP4 and up, melta gun squads, these things are going to fuck you up whether you're in cover or not. So if you have a hunch that there's going to be melta guns coming down this flank, that's probably the flank you're going to want to use the forest and craters on, because it's much better to have -1 to hit than it is to have +1 armor when you're being shot by melta guns majority of the time. This is also a great thing for orcs. So orcs don't have really good CPs, and we don't really need our CP for anything. So you can set up forests where you're like, I don't know if my boys are going to get to charge here or not, because I only move 6 inches, he moves 6 inches. It's just going to come down to like who gets a bigger roll or who gets there first. So you can put the forest in front of your boys, and if you're okay with spending the CP to just charge to that forest, ignore the modifiers, your opponent most likely doesn't have that ability. So he's going to get -2. You're not going to get -2. You could set up the forest to make it so your chance of getting the charge are much higher. Now, most events will have what's called the big piece. So the big piece, a lot of events will have, like, you can deploy, train has to be 4 inches apart for all the train, except for like the big piece, which has to be 6 inches apart. This is the piece that you use to take the center, just because you're going to box out most of your opponent's terrain, and you're going to control where he goes a lot easier. The middle will be on your terms. If you're playing something like Harlequins or another really, really fast army, those are the times where you'll want to place this on the side, because you don't care so much about the middle, because the middle is the most dangerous spot in the game to be. So if you're playing a glass cannon army, guys, don't always try to go for the middle. You want to go, you only need 2 objectives. If there's 3 objectives in the middle, you don't need to worry about one of them. You want to harass one of them, sure, and like if that way your opponent has to like leave something on it, but you really don't need to worry about it. You're going to be splitting your army in half. One's going to go towards one objective, one towards the other. And when you made your list, you thought about how this is going to be so unbeatable that no one will take you up this objective because XYZ. That's why your first piece you place down almost every time, unless you're up to something, some kind of weird shenanigans, this is going to be your first piece that you place down. This is also, if you go second and you're not able to take that spot that you want, this is a great piece for closing or creating those fire lanes. So you should have a bunch of ruins too, but this is a great piece for closing large sections of the battle. Anything that's not infantry, any cavalry, if you got blood crushers coming at you, if you got, dreadnoughts coming at you, this is your piece of terrain that's just the no zone. They're not gonna be here. I mean, they're gonna have to come either down the left or right side of it if they come down that way. That's how you're using it to create fire lanes. The one piece of heads up that enemies will use this to hurt you, and you can use this to hurt them, is generally these big pieces have large flat areas on the top. So flying units love to create ambush points for these. Not only can they be behind it if you have heavy shooting and then just go over the top of it, but they can land on top of it if you're playing if you got a Fabius Bile army that's almost all melee, they're just going to sit on top of it. Good luck charging them. You have to charge, an extra 5-6 inches up to get to them, and then, 4 inches over if you're right next to the wall. So usually you're pretty safe from melee if you're on top, and then if you're behind it with those flying units, you can easily just jump over the top of it. Another common piece is the box ruin. The box ruin with the openings. This is the little more rectangle looking pieces. It's similar to the L, it's just smaller, so it doesn't have the 6-inch no terrain deploy rule. It just has usually the 4-inch. This is a piece that you usually put on the sides. So similar to how you deploy the middle with all the big pieces, you do miniature versions of this on the side that you want to be taking. So you take your best box ruin that you have and the one that suits your army the best, and that's one you're usually going to deploy really far forward on the left or the right flank. A lot of times when you place this on flanks, guys, if you're playing like a Dawn of War where like you're just going straight into your opponent and it's not like a corner deployment or anything, turning these slightly at an angle is usually a big advantage, because you're trying the main firepower. If you put it on the left flank, the main firepower is going to be coming from the right side. So if you slightly angle it so it's blocking more to the right, people won't be able to get those angle shots on you quite as easily. And if there is something, again, I'm going to use the example of like 3 objectives down the middle or multiple objectives in the middle. This is if you, say, didn't get the center, or but there's already a piece down in the center, this is your other piece you want to place down on the center right away. So this will usually be your second piece that you're placing. So you're going to drop that big piece first to, get an idea what's going on, and next you're going to drop this small little box room. Next up we have the crates. So most tournaments are going to have you deploy like 2 to 3 crates down. This is an amazing piece of terrain that I feel like most people that I play against at events don't utilize correctly until I get to the late part of the tournament. This is the flying favorite. So as an example, since you can make these however you want to, I usually tend to put them in a diamond formation and use this to hide. Like if I have a really strong shooting unit that flies, like say long strike, I will basically create a little shield around him so that no one's going to get to the sides of him, no shenanigans going to happen, like no shots are going to come into him to the side. He's protected from the left, he's protected from the right, he's protected from the front, and then I'm just going to fly over the top of it next turn, jump out, and go.
Surprise, motherfucker!
If you lack flying shooting units that have more really long range, like a lot of armies do, this is a great one just to deny your opponent's infantry. So if you have any flying units that can go up and over these kind of things, this is going to give you so much more speed than what infantry on foot are going to do. So in this current edition, infantry units really feel the same as flying units, which I think is stupid. The infantry just go through everything and it's obnoxious. Like, only in 40k does being on a horse give you less fucking mobility. And that's why the crates alone can counter anti-infantry. And I know a lot of people, when they make lists, especially when they're newer, they tend to favor the big guns. And they don't think about like, oh, I might need guns that are really weak but shoot a lot of times. So if you have a lot of big power in your army and not a lot of ways to deal with enemy chaff, like this is a way you can deal with enemy chaff, is just by using your brain and putting where does that chaff want to go, and I'm going to block it with this, and that's where I'm going to send my flying units or my guys that can go around it, or say vehicles, cavalry, things that would have to go around terrain anyways. If you're going to have to go around it anyways, at least make your opponent have to go around it too. And that's why it's an awesome piece, is because it's custom. So you can, depending, some terrains have different rules, but I mean, a lot of times you can stack 3 on top of each other and just make something really freaking tall. Sometimes you can make it so tall that it can slightly hide even like an aircraft unit. You can use it and form the diamond wedge. You can use it and form a big long wall. A lot of times they have to be touching each other, and one has to be up higher, so it has to be like 5 inches off the ground. So that's a very customizable obscuring piece, which makes crates, in my opinion, one of the best pieces in the game. Just don't use it to obscure your infantry. Now I got some final tips for you guys. So starting with the thing that not enough people do, this is as big as pre-measuring, guys. Like, walk around the fucking table. So when you do this, you're going to be doing this twice. You're going to be walking around your opponent's table after he's deployed his terrain. That's going to give you an idea of what it is he's seeing, how he's seeing things. So you always want to see things through the eyes of your opponent. The second time you're going to walk around the table is after deployment of the armies are finished. He's literally trying to hide as much units as he can from you. So there's no rule against walking around the table so you can see where everything is. And that's another time where you can ask more questions about your opponent's army. Pre-measure, guys. Pre-measure, pre-measure. What is your threat range? What is this guy's threat range? Know all of your threat ranges. Know the bubble that you have of, like, your opponent walks into this zone, he's fucked. If you walk into this zone, you're fucked. And that's why threat zones are everything. Threat zones are so important. People say, you've heard other people tell you that games of 40k are won and lost in the movement phase. This is why. It's not the movement phase so much as it is setting up and creating threat zones. When you're playing games with player placed terrain, how you can evaluate yourself. So anytime that you stepped into, that you got into a fight, anytime that this fight happened here, or these guys died here, these guys won this fight here, could you have won the fight better if terrain was more in your favor? So that's why most armies never push past the midboard. You go to the midboard and then you stop, unless you're on something like the scouring or retrieval, like where you have to go further. Like, generally there's nothing for you on the other side. Just go to the middle and plant your feet. So when you planted your feet, are you in cover? Were you obscured? What did you use to have the terrain help protect you? If the answer is nothing, or your opponent had a protection on terrain, then you might have done something wrong, and you need to evaluate what you could have maybe done to fix that.
Stop it. Get some help.
But if you're a proactive player like me, the number one thing is to stay confident. So by always assuming that I'm going to roll badly and always assuming my opponent's going to roll well, I can stay confident, because if I think I win this fight using that math, then there should be no way that I lose. And I'll probably do even better than I thought. That's how you create epic plays in the late game. And anytime I do get discouraged, if I'm overwhelmed by anything at the start of a game, just always remember, this is the best game of 40K you've ever played in your life. Never before have you had as much 40K experience as the game that you're currently playing right now. And that means there's no reason to be worried about anything. Sometimes there's just nothing that can be done. Your opponent just put a piece of terrain in a way that's going to force you to engage not on your terms. Now, this is a tip that I got from a friend of mine that I've been thinking about. The more I think about this, is I think the way to do terrain, guys. So thank you for watching to the end, because I think I'm going to let you guys know on a little secret code like hack for this whole thing. So how this works is generally in a tournament, you have 5 minutes apiece, so 10 minutes total to deploy terrain at events. What you can actually do is you roll off for attacker, defender, everything's like normal, and after the first piece is down, whether it's you or them, then you just deploy all your terrain. Don't even freaking pay attention. None of that matters. If you know your list well enough, it will not matter what your opponent deploys where, like how he deploys his terrain. You're going to deploy your side of the table to be exactly perfect for the way that you built your army. And you're going to do it all ahead of time. So even though it's his turn to deploy, you're still going to deploy all pieces of terrain. So now you're going to have an idea of like, okay, so this unit is going to go behind here. Okay, this unit's going to go behind here. I think I've got everything set up so that, okay, I can now hide all my units. Now that all my units are hidden, now I have more pieces to deploy forward. Okay, I'm going to set that up and tell your opponent, I'm just going to use, hey buddy, I'm going to use my 5 minutes and I'm going to deploy everything right now. You can do it however you want to, but you can put 5 minutes of my time and I'm going to do all this terrain. So now when he deploys a piece, you just point to your piece and go, that one's next. And then he says, okay. There is no rule, guys, anywhere that says you have to deploy your terrain one at a time. There's no, unless a specific event has specific rules, you can totally deploy all your terrain at one time. And this also lets you kind of adjust it. So if you see, oh, I see you're doing that there, that means he's coming there. Well, let me just adjust this piece that I haven't pointed to yet. So I don't just do this to my opponent either. I like to think of myself as a courtesy player, and I really, people are here spending money to be in an event. I want them to. I'm going to get more out of this game if I lose than if I win, to be honest. So I'm always very honest with my opponent. I'm telling them this is exactly what I'm doing. If you guys have any questions, feel free to ask. No one should have an issue with this, though. And that's how, you can actually practice. By doing it this way, you can kind of practice at home. So if you have some extra terrain pieces at home, I mean, hell, use freaking encyclopedia books and soda cans. I don't care. But take the terrain that's going to be at your event when you get your little mission packet and make something that's the same size. Like if you use pieces of string that are cut to the same size as this terrain, lay it down on your kitchen table, your dining room table, and just deploy your army behind it. And then visualize in your head, okay, this unit goes up here, so that makes him go up to here. If I advance him, always figure you're going to aim low, so figure you get a 2 or a 3 on your advance. That gets him to about here at a minimum. And that's why after my buddy told me about this, it really changed the way I saw player place terrain, and this is the way to do it. Just preset up everything, guys. And that's why you should check out my Discord. So my Discord's awesome. It's super active. It's an amazing place for new players to the game. It's an amazing place for people just starting to get into tournaments, and it's an amazing place for pro players.
I joined the Discord, and I haven't lost since.
That's right, little Ewok dude. Everybody should do that. For some reason, they don't. I guess they just don't care that much about 40K. But to each their own. Don't forget, guys, send me your army lists. I'm going to tell you exactly why they suck. I review army lists all the time. It's probably I love doing it, so feel free to just message me on Discord or join our Discord and ask our group what everybody thinks of it. If you want some extra one-on-one help, guys, check out my Patreon. If you like my videos, like what I'm doing, check out my Patreon.
Scruffy believes in this company.
Thanks again for watching my video. If you guys hit the subscribe button or already hit the subscribe button, you got nothing to worry about because you think you pretty much automatically win your next game. I'm pretty sure that's the rule.
High five! All right!
If you didn't hit the subscribe button, enjoy your next loss. Join me in my next video. I plan on doing combat phase tips. If I don't get enough subscribers on this video, people don't like it enough, then my next video is going to be a Tau video. You guys get to decide.